Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It was one of those evenings when the house seemed too quiet for comfort. The ticking clock on the wall echoed through the living room, and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound keeping me company. I had just made myself a cup of chamomile tea, hoping its warmth would ease the heaviness I'd been carrying around in my chest lately. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the day had been ordinary, the kind that drifts by without leaving much of a mark. Then I heard the soft creak of the staircase. My grandson, Daniel, was supposed to be in bed hours ago. He was 15, at that age where boys seem caught between two worlds, still children in some ways, but suddenly carrying the weight of emotions too big for their shoulders. I looked up to see him standing at the bottom step, his hair tousled, eyes restless. He didn't say anything right away. Instead, he just lingered there, shifting from one foot to the other as though he was debating whether to come closer or retreat. I called his name gently, setting my tea aside. "Daniel, what are you doing up so late?" He hesitated, then crossed the room slowly and sat beside me on the couch. His silence spoke louder than words, and I could feel that something weighed heavily on him. The moment felt fragile, like a glass ornament dangling by a thread, and I didn't want to shatter it with the wrong word. So I waited. Finally, his voice broke the stillness, soft but trembling with honesty. "Grandma, can I tell you something? Something I haven't told anyone else?" My heart tightened. I nodded, resting my hand lightly over his. It was such a small gesture, but I wanted him to know he wasn't alone, that this was a safe space. The living room, dimly lit by the lamp in the corner, suddenly felt like a cocoon where time slowed, and nothing beyond these four walls mattered. He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough. Like no matter how hard I try, I'll always let people down." His words carried a rawness that pierced me. They weren't rehearsed or shaped to please anyone. They were heavy truths from a young heart, laid bare in the middle of the night. I wasn't prepared for the ache that rose inside me. I had always seen Daniel as a lively boy, full of curiosity and laughter, the kind who made jokes at the dinner table and brightened up the dullest afternoons. To hear such uncertainty spill from him caught me off guard. I'd brushed my hand over his hair, the way I used to when he was little. "Oh, Daniel, you're more than enough. More than you'll ever realize. Life will always make you question yourself, but what matters most isn't perfection. It's that you keep trying, that you keep being kind, that you stay true to yourself." He turned to me then, his eyes glistening in the lamplight. There was something about his gaze, so open, so trusting, that touched me deeper than I expected. It reminded me of all the times I had doubted myself when I was his age, and even long after. His honesty stirred something in me, a reflection of my own unspoken fears, and the realization that vulnerability is not weakness but courage. We sat there for a long time, words spilling out slowly. He shared more. His worries about school, about friends who seemed distant, about the future that felt too uncertain. And I listened, not with the intent to fix everything but to understand, to hold space for him. Outside, the world was wrapped in darkness, but inside, a light grew between us. His honesty bridged the years that separated us, reminding me that while we come from different times and experiences, our hearts beat to the same rhythm of longing. For acceptance, for reassurance, for love. That night, I realized how important it is to hear the voices of the young, to not dismiss their fears as just a phase. His honesty touched me not only because of what he shared, but because he trusted me enough to open up. It was a gift, fragile and precious, one I would carry with me always. When he finally leaned against my shoulder, his breathing slowing as the weight lifted off him, I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. For his courage, for the chance to be his listener, and for the reminder that sometimes the deepest connections come in the quietest of moments, when the world is asleep and two hearts simply choose to meet in truth. That was just the beginning of a night that would stay with me for years. A night when my grandson's honesty reached places in me I thought had long closed, reminding me that love, in its purest form, is found in the courage to be vulnerable and the grace to receive it. The next morning, the sunlight slipped quietly through the curtains, painting streaks of gold across the living room where we had sat the night before. I woke earlier than usual, stirred by the memory of Daniel's words echoing in my mind. His honesty hadn't just surprised me. It had stirred something inside me that I hadn't felt in years. A mix of tenderness, worry, and admiration all at once. I busied myself in the kitchen, making pancakes the way Daniel liked them, with a bit of vanilla in the batter and fresh blueberries on the side. The sizzle of the pan and the sweet aroma filled the air, but my thoughts kept drifting back to his trembling voice, the way he confessed his fears, as though the darkness had granted him courage. I wondered if he would regret sharing so much, if the daylight would make him retreat behind the wall so many young boys build around their emotions. When he finally came down the stairs, his hair messy and eyes still heavy with sleep, I noticed the hesitation in his steps. For a moment, he looked at me as though checking to see if I remembered, or worse, if I would bring it up and embarrass him. So I greeted him as naturally as I could. "Morning, sweetheart. Breakfast is ready." He sat at the table, fork in hand, poking at the pancakes without much enthusiasm. It wasn't the usual Daniel who joked about how many he could eat in one sitting. His quietness made me realize he was testing the waters, waiting to see if our conversation was safe to carry into the daylight. I decided not to push him. Instead, I spoke gently. "You know, Daniel, what you told me last night was very brave. Most people, even adults, don't always admit how they feel. But you did, and that shows strength, not weakness." His eyes lifted slowly to meet mine. "Do you really think so?" His voice was softer now, unsure. "I do," I answered firmly. "When you let someone see what's inside, you give them a chance to love you for who you really are. And that's one of the most powerful gifts you can give to another person." For the first time that morning, I saw the tension ease slightly from his face. He ate a few bites, and then, almost out of nowhere, he said, "Sometimes I feel like everyone expects me to know what I'm supposed to be. But I don't. I don't even know who I am half the time." His honesty cut through me again. It reminded me of my own teenage years, of those long nights lying awake, wondering if I'd ever truly belong anywhere. I reached across the table, resting my hand over his. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. None of us do, even when we're older. Life is more about learning as you go, making mistakes, and growing from them. The important thing is that you don't stop asking questions about who you are." He let out a small laugh, a nervous kind. "But what if I never figure it out?" "Then you'll keep discovering," I said, squeezing his hand gently. "That's what makes life meaningful. You'll keep changing, and that's not a bad thing. It's what makes you human." There was a silence after that, but not the heavy kind. It was softer, more thoughtful, as if my words were settling somewhere inside him. I could almost see him turning them over in his mind like stones in a stream, smoothing the sharp edges with time. Later that day, we went for a walk through the park. The leaves had just started to change, splashes of amber and crimson painting the trees. Daniel walked beside me, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes on the path ahead. He was quieter than usual, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of before. It felt like he was carrying something within him, weighing it carefully before deciding to share. Finally, he spoke. "Grandma, do you ever feel like you're just pretending to be okay? Like on the outside you look fine, but inside you're not?" His question stopped me in my tracks. I turned to look at him, and the rawness in his face nearly brought tears to my eyes. It was such a profound thing for him to admit, and it struck me how deeply he was already wrestling with the truths that many people spend a lifetime avoiding. I nodded slowly. "Yes, Daniel. I've felt that way more times than I can count. But pretending doesn't always mean lying. It can also mean giving yourself time until you're strong enough to face what's inside. And sometimes sharing what's inside, like you did last night, is the first step toward truly feeling okay." We kept walking, the crunch of fallen leaves beneath our shoes filling the space between us. I could feel that he was processing, taking each word and holding it close. For me, the walk became more than just a stroll through the park. It became a bridge between generations, a moment where my experiences could soften his fears, and his honesty could remind me of the courage it takes to simply be open. By the time we returned home, something had shifted. He wasn't cured of his doubts, and I knew this was only the beginning of many conversations to come. But the walls between us had crumbled, and in their place stood something far stronger: trust. That evening, as I watched him sitting in the armchair reading quietly, I realized that his honesty hadn't just touched me. It had awakened me. It reminded me that no matter how much time passes, no matter how many years stack upon us, the need for understanding, acceptance, and truth remains the same. And sometimes the deepest wisdom doesn't come from the old teaching the young, but from the young daring to speak their truth and the old choosing to listen. The days that followed seemed lighter somehow, as though that one late-night conversation had loosened something in Daniel's spirit. I noticed it in the way he carried himself, still thoughtful but a little less weighed down. Yet I also knew that one talk, no matter how heartfelt, couldn't erase the questions he carried. It was only the beginning, and I felt a quiet responsibility to be there for him whenever those unspoken worries resurfaced. One afternoon, he came home from school and dropped his backpack by the door with a heavy sigh. I was folding laundry in the living room, but I could tell right away that something had unsettled him. His shoulders slumped, and he avoided my eyes, heading straight for the couch. I didn't press. Instead, I waited for him to find his words, because I have learned that silence, when paired with patience, often gave him the courage to speak. After a few minutes, he said, "Grandma, do you think people really know who I am? Or do they just see what they want to see?" The question made me pause. I set down the towel in my hands and sat beside him. His voice wasn't angry. It was searching, tender, almost fragile. I could see in his eyes that he was wrestling with the kind of confusion that comes from wanting to be understood, but feeling invisible in a world that often overlooks young voices. "Daniel," I began softly, "the truth is, most people only see parts of us. They see the parts we show them, or the parts they notice. But very few see all of us, the fears, the hopes, the parts we hide. That's why it's important to find people you can trust with the real you. People who won't judge, but will listen." He was quiet, staring at the carpet, his fingers picking at a loose thread on the cushion. Sometimes I feel like I don't even know the real me. How can anyone else? His honesty reached into me again, pulling at my own hidden memories. I thought about when I was his age, feeling so lost, desperate to be seen yet afraid of being misunderstood. I took a deep breath and told him, "You don't have to know yourself completely right now. Who you are isn't a finished picture. It's a painting still in progress. You'll keep adding colors, shading, and details as you live. What matters most is that you stay open to discovering who you are becoming." He finally looked up at me, his eyes wide, searching my face for something solid. But what if people don't like the real me once they find out? That question pierced me. I reached over and placed my hand over his. Then those people aren't the ones meant to stay in your life. The ones who matter will love you for your truth, not for a mask you wear. And the right people will only love you more the more they see who you really are. There was a stillness after my words, as though the house itself held its breath. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "I hope that's true." Later that evening, we sat together on the porch, the autumn air crisp and tinged with the faint smell of burning leaves from a neighbor's yard. The sky was painted in shades of orange and lavender as the sun dipped low. Daniel leaned against the railing, his face softened by the twilight. "I told one of my friends today that I was scared about the future," he admitted quietly. And he just laughed, said I was overthinking. It made me feel stupid for even saying it. I shook my head gently. "No, Daniel, that doesn't make you stupid, it makes you brave." Most people hide their fears behind laughter or silence, but the ones who speak them aloud are the ones with the courage to face them. He absorbed my words, his eyes fixed on the horizon as though searching for answers in the fading light. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, but there was no need to. The bond between us didn't always need words. It was in the simple act of being there, of sharing the quiet and letting honesty exist without fear. When the first stars began to appear, he turned to me and said softly, "I feel like I can breathe when I talk to you. Like I don't have to pretend." Those words touched me in a place deeper than I can describe. I felt a lump rise in my throat, and I fought back tears. "That's all I ever want for you, Daniel. To know that you're safe to be yourself. Always." That night, after he had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars. His words echoed inside me, not just as his truth, but as a reminder of my own life. How often had I hidden behind masks, pretending to be strong when I wasn't? How many times had I wished for someone to simply listen without judgment? I realized then that Daniel wasn't just finding his way. He was helping me rediscover parts of myself I had long buried. His honesty wasn't only a gift from grandson to grandmother. It was a mirror reflecting back truths I, too, had once needed to hear. The journey wasn't over. It had only deepened. Each time he opened up, it drew us closer, weaving a bond stronger than silence, stronger than doubt. And as I watched the stars, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. I would always be his safe place, no matter how many questions or confessions came in the years ahead. That night, after our porch conversation, I lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling as the sound of crickets floated in through the open window. Daniel's words stayed with me. "I feel like I can breathe when I talk to you." They weren't just a confession. They were a quiet plea, a reminder of how deeply our young ones need to feel safe, understood, and accepted. I realized that my role wasn't just to listen, but to help guide him toward a steadier ground, even when I didn't have all the answers myself. The following weekend, I decided to take Daniel on a small trip outside town. Nothing extravagant, just a walk through a nature preserve an hour away. The trails there wound through tall oaks and maples, their leaves already glowing in gold and crimson, and the air always seemed clearer, freer somehow. I thought it might give him space to breathe, and maybe a little space for me, too. We left early in the morning, a thermos of hot cocoa in my bag, and his favorite chocolate chip muffins wrapped in paper. The drive was quiet at first, but not tense. He gazed out the window, headphones dangling around his neck, while I hummed softly to the radio. About halfway there, he spoke without looking at me. "Grandma." I think sometimes I'm scared I'll disappoint you." The words hit me hard, though he said them so softly. I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "Daniel, nothing you could ever say or do would make me stop loving you. You don't have to earn my pride. You already have it." He blinked rapidly, like he was trying to keep his eyes from stinging. "But what if I'm not who you expect me to be?" "You don't have to be who I expect," I said. "You just have to be you. Whoever that turns out to be." We fell into a silence after that, but it felt different. Less of a wall, more of a bridge. When we arrived, the sun was filtering through the trees, casting dappled light on the path ahead. We walked slowly, leaves crunching under our feet. Daniel carried a stick, absent-mindedly dragging it along the edge of the trail, the way kids do when they're lost in thought. After a while, he began talking again, more openly this time. About school pressures, about friends who didn't always understand him, about moments when he felt like no one really saw the real boy behind his smile. I listened carefully, letting him empty his heart without interruption. The woods around us felt like a sanctuary, the rustling of leaves like a quiet applause for his courage. When we stopped to rest on a bench overlooking a small stream, I poured cocoa into 2 cups and handed one to him. "Daniel," I said, "being honest about how you feel is one of the bravest things you can do. But don't forget to also be gentle with yourself. You're still growing. You're allowed to not know everything." He wrapped his hands around the cup, warming them. "Do you ever, I don't know, wish you could go back and tell your younger self something?" I smiled faintly. "All the time. I tell her not to be so afraid of making mistakes, that the people who matter will stay, and that being vulnerable doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." He stared at his reflection in the cocoa for a moment, then said, "That's what I want. To not be afraid of being me." I reached over and took his hand, the way I had that first night on the couch. "Then you're already on your way. The fact that you can even say that out loud means you're stronger than you think." For a long time we sat there, watching the water flow over stones, the sunlight flickering on its surface. The moment felt timeless, as though the world had slowed just to let us sit in it. I could feel something settling in him, a quiet understanding, a beginning of self-acceptance, and in me, a deep gratitude for being allowed into his inner world. On the drive home, he leaned his head back against the seat and said softly, "Thank you for always listening." My throat tightened, but I managed a steady voice. "Thank you for trusting me." That night, after he'd gone to bed, I walked into the living room and looked at the couch where it had all started, the midnight confession, the tremble in his voice, the honesty that had cracked something open in both of us. I realized then that our bond had changed forever, not because I had solved his problems, but because I had listened and let him be real. His honesty had touched me deeper than I ever expected. It reminded me that even as adults, we need the same things: to be heard, to be accepted, and to know we're not alone. And in giving him that, he had unknowingly given it back to me, a reminder of my own strength, my own capacity for openness, and my own unfinished journey. As I turned off the lamp and climbed the stairs, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The future would hold more questions, more late-night talks, more moments of doubt and discovery. But now I knew we'd face them together. His courage had met my compassion, and somewhere in that meeting, we had both grown. It was an unexpected gift from my grandson's heart to mine, one that would echo in me for the rest of my days, a memory I would carry not as a burden, but as a light.